The Shark Deck.
Hey, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. From Whiskey Riff, comedian writes the inevitable Taylor Swift breakup song about Travis Kelce, and it's hilarious. Andrew Miles, who wrote the article, says, for starters, I'm not a Taylor Swift hater in the slightest. She's a great songwriter. She's gone to bat for artists against the music industry's shoddy business practices multiple times and deserves a ton of respect for what she's been able to do throughout her career. But this whole Travis Kelce stuff is just too much. Andrew Miles says, when I stumbled upon this, it was too good not to enjoy. I clicked on it. It is a song by Will King, and I agree. It's too good not to enjoy. Here's Will King.
We made it to the 50, and then you kissed me. We made it to the 40, a new love story. We made it to the 30, and you did me dirty right then. Put the end in tight end.
Nailed it. And you can follow Will King Music on Instagram, where he posted that. Will King Music on Instagram. When I left you yesterday, I had clicked on an article and I'm like, hey, what's this Bob Odenkirk, David Cross thing I hadn't previously seen? I'll do that tomorrow. Well, it's now tomorrow. Odenkirk was on with Colbert. Colbert pointed out that someone paid $24,550 to have a meal with Bob Odenkirk and David Cross. Odenkirk said, what is this person expecting? I'm only thankful that I'm not cooking. That's all I'll say. This is a very generous person who really loves Mr. Show. Cross and Odenkirk co-starred on that one. Bob says he doesn't know where they'll be taking the fan for lunch yet and hasn't been in contact with the fan. But they're going to schedule it for a time when they can all be in the same restaurant. Yeah, for $25,000. Yes, Bob, I want you and David both there in the same restaurant with me. It's $25,000, dude. Brian Posehn spoke to the Toledo Blade about his acting roles. His first acting role was that of a diehard football fan on the 80s sitcom Empty Nest. Posehn said, I was playing a Miami's Dolphin fan and I was shirtless. Some of my early characters didn't even have real names. They were just like Weirdo or Clerk or Painted Gut Guy. Which was the name of the Dolphins fan. That's great. Following guest appearances on Seinfeld and Friends, Posehn was cast as one of the, quote, mutants at Table 9 in the Adam Sandler vehicle The Wedding Singer, one of the few watchable Adam Sandler movies. Brian said, I knew Adam Sandler, and my buddy was his assistant. And Adam asked him to reach out to me to see if I wanted to do that role. Adam looked out for me that day. It was a fun shoot day. It felt cool to be on the set of a big Hollywood movie. BikeMag.com, your home for bicycling comedy news, caught up with Kyle Kinane. I'm going to poke at a couple things in this article. I really like Kyle Kinane. I really, really like Kyle Kinane. Let me remind you, the current top 5 comedy specials of 2023 are Todd Barry, Shane Gillis, Tom Segura, Kyle Kinane, and Nate Bargatze. So I like Kyle Kinane, but what I'm pushing back here at, BikeMag.com wrote, A-list comedian Kyle Kinane is an avid mountain biker. Is Kyle an A-list comedian? I mean, is he Seinfeld, Mulaney, Chappelle, Rock? I don't think he is. I mean, I put Sarah Silverman on that list. Amy Schumer's probably on that list. So I don't know if Kyle's A-list comedian. Anyway, Kyle Kinane has a bike and keeps wiping out, and he has videos of his crashes. I'll play a short clip here. There's not a lot to play. You get the idea. I like Kyle a lot. Don't let me be misconstrued. Will Ferrell has announced the Big Money Players Circle. Ferrell has handpicked the coolest and funniest social sensations to join his podcast network and be showcased on the podcast network. Comedians picked to participate in the Big Money Players Circle will receive invaluable training from some of the biggest names in comedy and podcasting, unparalleled exposure to new audiences, and opportunities to work with top-tier brands. Will said, from the time I was a wee baby boy, in fact, before I ever uttered my first words, I have always dreamt of assembling a team of comedians as funny and talented as the Big Money Players Circle. There will be a Big Money Players Circle live with sponsor name showcase as part of the New York Comedy Festival on November 12th. GQ focused on the real-life diet of comedian Chris DiStefano, who only eats sweets on Saturday. And GQ was like, hey, you've been talking about intermittent fasting on your podcast. How's that going? And Chris said, I started in August of last year. I got on the scale and I was like 255 pounds. The thing with me is no one really notices it, but I noticed it. If you look at a picture of me a year ago, you'd be like, oh, he doesn't look too different. Now people will tell me I look different, but the weight was there then, and I felt like crap and I hated it. So I said, I got to do two things in my life right now. I got to get off social media, and I've got to lose weight and feel like an athlete again. It's one of those things where I just said it like that in my mind, but I think if you silently ask the universe for something, sometimes it gives it back to you. About an hour later, I'm sitting on Twitter, even though I said I was getting off social media, and I was scrolling. I saw a tweet from Elon Musk saying he had lost a lot of weight using an intermittent fasting app. I downloaded that app, and I thought, you're going to change your eating habits. This is the last morning you're waking up feeling like crap and wondering why you ate that way last night. You're not doing it anymore. I just got mad at myself, but I kept it all in. The mistake I used to do was telling everybody what I'm about to do because I thought if I put pressure on myself, I'll do it. It just set me up for failure. I realized this is just about me and I don't need to announce it to anyone, so I did it. I started with a 16-hour fast. They said on the app, don't worry about what you're eating in your fasting window in the beginning, just focus on your fasting window. In those first few weeks, if all you're going to do is eat chocolate cake in your 8 hours, then do it. And then, after a week, just like the app said, I didn't want to binge anymore in the 8-hour window. If you look at the last 8 months, his weight has gone from 255 to 212. Nice. Are you working out through all this? Chris says, yes, I've always worked out. I never really got the results. I mean, in college, I was a college athlete in sports for my whole life, but then I would still eat like an athlete, thinking if I got my workout in, I'd be fine. Then I had kids, and it slowly started to happen. I hear ya. If you look at my last comedy special, I can see a little weight in my face and a little bloat from drinking. I hear ya. For this career, I know I want to be presentable. Sex sells or whatever, but nobody in my life was like, dude, you're getting out of control. The problem is I could hide it. People would think I was in shape and it would hurt me because I would almost rather be the guy who was just obviously fat. I had a casting director say to me, you have a leading man face and a best friend body. Whew. Johnny Mac, are you going to finish the 25 comedians you should and will know in 2023 article that's on Vulture that you've been doing for a week now and you didn't even do yesterday? Yes, we're finishing it right now, no matter how many names there are there. Vulture writes, August White's unique strength is combining a high-stakes political environment with low-stakes humor in one joke from a January Comedy Central set. White describes the intensity of being in a Black Lives Matter protest, of being surrounded by tear gas and watching the police pull away a man who chants a phone number so the crowd can contact his girlfriend, her joke. As my friends are dragging me to safety, the only thing I think to myself is, oh my God, he memorized her number. That's beautiful. Maggie Winters has a natural, easygoing, wry sense of humor, writes Vulture, that can fit itself into any alt lineup. With endless material about her family and bizarre encounters with strangers. A joke. I know you guys have been thinking this whole time, she used to work for Subway. Yeah, I did okay. I was one of Jared's soldiers. Sabrina Wu is currently in a one-sided feud with National Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman that began when they were both at Harvard, where Gorman was, according to Wu, better than them in a storytelling class. While Gorman dreamed early of becoming the first black woman president, Wu said they hope to be like an Asian Jack Black. I've seen Sabrina at the 2022 Just for Laughs Comedy Festival. They were one of the new faces and very funny. Zach Zimmerman, we're at the Z's, so we must almost be done, right? No, there's more than one Z. Zach Zimmerman, whose often autobiographical comedy tends to dig in the tension between a conservative background and life as a queer, atheist, comedian, vegetarian, who sometimes cheats with fish. One of Zimmerman's signature jokes is about their mother, a woman whose decades of work as a server at Red Lobster has honed her keen revenge instincts for the patrons who don't tip. Sophie Zucker. All right, we're in our second Z. We must almost be done, right? No, there are more Zs. Vulture tells us Sophie Zucker has worked on the beloved cultish Apple TV Plus series Dickinson as both a writer and actor. Zucker became best known for her show at the Edinburgh Fringe, Sophie Sucks Face, a wild and well-wrought one-woman musical about funerals and incest. Yikes. And last but not least, but last alphabetically, Zach Zucker. Vulture writes, let me guess, you don't find the ancient art of clowning particularly punk rock, but what other comic on this list can say they were physically dragged off stage by security during a show mid-set this year for going too hard, like some kind of chaotic bisexual Lenny Bruce? But that's what happened to Zach at London's Just for Laughs Festival. Zucker founded Stamptown, a variety show and performance collective that attracts a diverse range of comedians like, great list here, David Cross, Reggie Watts, Natalie Palamides, Joe Firestone, Neil Hamburger, Randy Feldface, and Veer Das. They all tried out experimental concepts they wouldn't normally do elsewhere. Boy, what a great list there. And those are the comedians you should and will know in 2023. Johnny Mac, you're not like giving us a vibe that you have too much content, because you remember you started this podcast and then there was a pandemic like a month later and you had a stretch for a year and a half. Don't be mad there's too much content. You're right, inner voice that is much angrier than Jim Gaffigan's inner voice rip-off bit. From koimoy.com, Eddie Izzard's own stand-up comedy inspired her performance in Dr. Jekkyl. Eddie will play the dual roles of the calm and sweet Nina Jekkyl and the maniacal Rachel Hyde in a retelling of the classic story. Eddie admitted playing Hyde took a toll. I enjoyed it, but yeah, it was tough, really tough. A lot of retakes. I was just trying to be open and channel the character. It was intense, but it's great. There's a spoiler about the end that I'm not going to ruin, but Eddie said, I had to go somewhere at the end, and I honestly wasn't sure what was going to come out. When I do stand-up, and when that's flying, I don't quite know what's coming out of me, and I knew if I could get to that place in the drama, that would be interesting, where the person you're acting against is thinking, where is this coming from? Do you want to know what the spoiler is? I'll tell you the spoiler at the very end, okay? At the very end of the podcast, I'll tell you what happened. Dr. Jekkyl, October 27th. Jay Pharoah talked about who gets mad at his impressions, and he said Kanye West is easily the most offended person that Pharoah does an impression of. But he didn't say he was mad until he got on stage and said what he said. Kanye gets mad at everybody, so you can't count on that one. I'm thinking we're cool, and he gets on stage the next day at the Made in America festival, and he disses me in front of 50,000 people. John Cleese has blasted a TV host who nicknamed Meghan Markle Woko Mono during a series of news broadcasts. Mark Dolan made the Woko Mono joke. Cleese on social media said, Mark Dolan is really appalling, isn't he? Seems to me that GB News is harming itself by putting out this nasty, vulgar rubbish. I guess John's not going to enjoy Palace Intrigue. That's the podcast where we talk about the royal family and we report things like somebody on TV calling Meghan Woko Mono. You can follow Palace Intrigue wherever you get your shows, even if you used to be in Monty Python. I lasted exactly 1 week remembering to tell you that I host a weekly show on the Live One app. The app is free. The Live One app is free. The show is called The Weekly Comedy Thing. The show is also free. And I had made a September resolution to tell you every week who's on the show, and I did it, and then last week I forgot, but today it's in the notes. So who's on this week's show? Johnny Mac, and what's it called again? Where do I get it? Thank you for asking, inner voice Jim Gaffigan ripoff bit that's not nearly as clever as Jim's. How do I get the show? It's on the Live One app. It's called The Weekly Comedy Thing, and on this week's Weekly Comedy Thing, Bill Burr, Nate Bargatze, Jen Fulwiler, Hassan Minhaj, Tom Segura, Bob Saget, Brian Posehn, Sam Morril and Chris Rock, Eliza Schlesinger, Pete Davidson, Sophie Buttle, a bit about spies that I think is fantastic, Robin Williams and Steve Martin. If you listen to that show, you're going to be like, hey, I've heard some of those stories. Yes, the difference between this and that is there. I can actually back it up with the comedy, and I keep these stories much shorter. And that is your comedy news for today, except for the spoiler. So I'll remind you, follow the show and all that. And if you don't want to hear the spoiler, hit stop right now. Spoiler coming up in 3, 2, 1. Remember, I told you Eddie Izzard said, I had to go somewhere at the end, and I honestly wasn't sure what was going to come out. When I do stand-up, I don't know what's coming out of me, and I knew if I could get to that place in the drama, that would be interesting, where the person you're acting against is thinking, where's this coming from? What Eddie did, Hyde brutally beats a man to death with a stick. Way to end the show on an upbeat note, Johnny Mac. See you tomorrow.